Can anybody hear me? Can you put your hand up if you can't hear me? Okay, you'll notice that I'm sitting down. That's because I can't stand for 8 hours. I'll be reading from my notes because I've no memory either. The way that this will work, I shall talk for 45 to 50 minutes and then there'll be a break, and then we'll talk for another 45, 50 minutes. There'll be another break, and in that break you'll be offered counselling if you need it. And then we'll do the third part, which will end when it finishes.
We have to get us eating along.
Right, when I can find my little button. Here we go then. Here's my little pointer. That little wood is on Lakeland Drive. That's where the little shop is. So that's all up Lakeland Drive. That's just an advert for the shop, nothing to do with this tour. This photo, it shows the location of a long barrow burial cairn. It was where the small wood is seen at the top there. In the Neolithic period, remains of the dead were placed in a large earth mound up to 70 metres in length, known as a long barrow. And there was one here, 50 metres in length. Around 6,500 years ago, most of the people in this area were hunter-gatherers. Some, however, learned how to farm as opposed to hunting. But it took 3,000 more years before farming became the main way of life. The first dwellings they built were wood and stone houses with moss or thatched roofs. The whole of that wood is the long barrow, and that's why it hasn't been built on. These skulls were found there. Both skulls were male. In this photo, they are seen in Clifton Park Museum. The long barrow was excavated in 1862 by the Oxford University at the request of the Squire. The contents are now in Oxford University Museum. Up to 24 skeletons were found in the centre in a seated position, mostly old men, and one towards one end. We don't know why. A skull was found by local lads who played football with it. Then they took it up to the hall and lit a candle inside it. Miss Aythorpe saw it through her window and fainted with fright. Dinnington was originally an Anglo-Saxon settlement between 460 and 1066 AD, and evidence can still be seen in the wall of the cottage in Falcon Square. The original stonework of the end wall of a Saxon building is embedded in the wall of the cottage at the side of the Royal Elephant car park. Unfortunately, the Royal Elephant is no longer there. This is the oldest wall in Dinnington. There's another picture of the wall. So when you go up there, you'll know why. That's the same wall superimposed, showing how it would possibly have been as part of a small community. Early Saxon houses were built as a single room with a thatched roof. There was a hole in the middle to relieve the smoke from the fire that was in a pit in the centre of the floor. The warmest place in the house was in the thatched roof, and the dogs, cats and various other creatures would climb up and sleep under the thatch. When the rain was so heavy that it came through the thatch, the animals would jump down. And so when rain is really heavy, we say it's raining cats and dogs.
You made that up.
I resemble that remark. That's how Dinnington was in the 1880, very, very tiny. The occupied road at the top there is Barleycroft Lane, and New Road is about, that's it, that's all there was. There's the park. In the 1800s, the only way to get from Anston to Dinnington was via the track that is now the path through the park. All horse-drawn and foot traffic had to use this track. At that time, the track had a slightly different route than today's path. The track passed quite close to the hall at Dinnington and came out below the top of Church Lane, then called Common Lane. All the horse-drawn traffic, and sometimes those going home to Anston after a good session in the Falcon, would be happily singing as they passed the hall. The squire thought that this was an invasion of his privacy, so he decided to build a new road in 1850. This new road started at the Green or Falcon Square in Dinnington and continued almost to the Green in Anston. The whole of that road was called New Road. Later, the long stretch was named Dinnington Lane. Later still, this was renamed Nursery Road, as it started at the Dinnington end where the nurseries to the hall were located and ended just beyond the nurseries in Anston. The remaining part of the road was, and still is, New Road. This is Herbert Hurst at the controls of his steamroller, and he's laying the first metal surface to New Road. This would be sometime after 1930. The coach house near Hall Court Vets, it was built in 1696, but in more recent times it housed the fire cart in a lean-to on the end, and you can still see marks where it was. This is a cottage between the coach house and the pinfold. Now the roadside is further away from it. This used to be the home of Mr. Stamp, the chauffeur to the Aythorpes, and he also had a shop below the bank. The Wayside Inn, it was the oldest known drinking establishment in Dinnington, 1700s. This painting of it hung in the Falcon for many years. The inn was located on the Green. That's the first Falcon Inn. It was here since at least 1838 when the Makinson family ran it. Rented it from the squire until Mappin's Brewery bought it in 1906. In the early days, the only lighting in the inn and the houses was from candles or paraffin lamps. There was a Mr. Wright who came from Brampton with a horse-drawn paraffin van, and that was the only source of paraffin. Here he is delivering paraffin in Lawton. By 1916, Mr. Wright had progressed from his horse to a lorry. At that time, there was no transport from Brampton and surrounding villages to Rotherham, and people had to walk to the Stag to catch a tram. Mr. Wright had a brainwave. On Saturdays, he would remove all his paraffin barrels and fit wooden seats to his lorry and use it as a bus. The fare was 5p return. Unfortunately, the following year, he was put out of business because Mr. Redfern bought a bus that everyone called the Old Kent Road. The fare was still 5p, but everyone enjoyed travelling in comparative comfort and without smelling of paraffin for the rest of the day. Later, gas was piped from the pit for lighting. Mr. Albert Turner of South Anston, however, adopted a system for his residents to be illuminated by acetylene gas. That's the equipment. The equipment for generating the gas was installed in his outhouse at the rear of the house and then piped into each room. The method for producing the gas was to create a reaction between calcium carbide and water, The carbide was stored in pellet form in a container outside the main premises, and water was allowed to drip in it, which produced acetylene gas. The acetylene burned with a bright, steady flame, which was superior to coal gas or oil. The cost was a little more expensive than oil, but the benefits outweighed the cost. And Mr. Turner also arranged for Anston Wesleyan Chapel to be lit by the same means. This is the second Falcon. It had its own brew house added to it. The brewery knocked it down and built the mock Tudor one that we remember. While this was being built, beer was served from the stables so that they retained their licence. It was named the Falcon after one of the Aythorpes who had been falconer to King James I in the 1600s. The site of this Falcon Inn, before the inn existed, was where the aviary, or to be correct, the mews, was situated that the hawks and falcons were kept in by the falconer. This is the farmhouse of Church Farm, built in 1700s. It was farmed by Bob Fisher, who was also a shoemaker. Today it is the Venus restaurant. Where the bar is in the Venus was the shoemaker's shop. The green, and ahead is the path through the park to Anston. Before 1885, showing at the bottom, the nurseries. That's the nurseries to the hall on Nursery Road, and that's why it's Nursery Road. Transport of the day, pony and trap, or horse and cart. Did you know that all ponies are horses, but not all horses are ponies? The man with the horse and cart is John Bulmer, who lived on Church Lane. He was my great uncle. There he is, chatting to Billy Hawke, to Martin Hawke, the father of Billy Hawke, and he lived in the Pinfold Cottage. He was the blacksmith before 1922, with the Gurnhill Trough, which is now in Coronation Park, opposite the Resource Centre. More about that later. There's a close-up looking down Lawton Road. The mock Tudor style Falcon Hotel, built in the 1920s and demolished in 1972. In the early days, this was actually a residential hotel, and a number of local dignitaries lived there, including the founder of the Brickworks, that was where Marquis Caravans is now. Mr. Dickinson, who ran the hotel, started the very first bus service in Dinnington, when previously the only service was a horse-drawn wagonette. The bus wasn't allowed to go all the way into Sheffield and had to terminate at the top of Answorth Hill in order to protect Sheffield tram service. Passengers then had to continue by tram. Mr. Dickinson retired in 1953, and the Falcon was starting to become a bit of a rough place to go, and it was getting quite a name for itself. Young Harry Dickinson, aged 10, had a daily job of cleaning out the spittoons. They were filled with sawdust, and he had to empty and wash them and then stand them on the coke-fired boiler till they were red hot to sterilise them. Then he had to black lead and polish them and refill them with sawdust. That's a photo I've coloured. Water for the Falcon was hand-pumped from a well in the backyard. It was pumped up to 2 large tanks in the roof of the hotel, and then the hotel had running water from these tanks. Upstairs above the huge tap room was a ballroom that could cater for 200 dancing couples. The tap room was used in the event of fatal accidents as a temporary mortuary. And there was a fire caused by workmen, but minimal damage was confined to one room, and there's the old fire engine on the right. The bus shelter, built by Sid Hodkin, with its unique aroma. It had scent guidance for the visually impaired, as it was often used as a secondary toilet for the Falcon. Also, the void in the roof space was sometimes an alternative location for some who should be in the classroom. And this is one that I've coloured, and on the left is East Midlands bus, and on the right, the ever dependable Wigmore's. That's a cooler picture in winter with a white pit tip, the Dinnington Alps. That's the very early days of Falcon Garage. Falcon Garage on the right, and Twible's old Hall Farm next to it. That's today's view. And there it is from the old Hall Farm. So called because this was the original manor in 1677, when John Aythorpe of Gloucester bought the manor of Dinnington from the 6th Duke of Norfolk. John died in 1722. He was succeeded by his son Henry, who built the present Dinnington Hall building in 1752. And there's the milk provider at the front. Jack Atkinson's Falcon Garage, 1950s to 60s. This is St Leonard's before the second extension was built. In the very early days, the previous church was dedicated to St Nicholas. In the time of the Aythorpes, everybody attended church, but nobody entered the church until the Aythorpes had gone in and sat down in their own private pews with a small coal fire lit beside them when needed. That was why the church has a chimney. Falcon bus terminus before the shelter replaced the seats. The gas lamp was fuelled by gas from the pit coke ovens. You might just be able to spot a post box in the wall of the churchyard. This was St Leonard's Church after the second extension built in 1911. That's a black and white photo that I've coloured. Half of the Falcon was demolished and the new Falcon pub was built at the same time. Before demolishing the rest, there was no disruption to service. 1972. There's a new Falcon, almost completed, nearly ready to open. A Falcon Boxing Club. And there's a bus shelter built by Sid Hodkin being demolished. It was built in 1938. I'm not sure exactly when it was knocked down. That's an aerial view of the last Falcon pub before being shuttered up and then sold. It became the Royal Elephant Thai restaurant. That shows the old road layout. And there's the number 15 bus at the other side of the square. And those seats were probably where the world was put to rights. That gas lamp was the first lamp to be lit all night in the village in the early 1920s. And there's the Sheffield number 15 bus behind Wigmore's bus. This is special to me. That's my dad. Dad was a mechanic, so there must have been a driver off. But Wigmore's never let you down. Very old time buses at the square. Portland's bus on the right and Underwood's from Lawrence Hill on the left. Before the buses, if you wanted to go to Sheffield or Rotherham, there was a horse-drawn wagonette that ran twice weekly service. Mr. Hurst wanted to sell some sheep in Rotherham Market, so he had to walk all the way to Rotherham with his sheep and then walk all the way back afterwards. The old farmhouse of Church Farm, and here it is Dean's shop, later shop and deli. And on the right wall inside the shop was a board that held PG Tips tea cards that we collected from packets of tea. You could swap them from the board. Today, this is now the Venus restaurant. Everyone looked forward to a TV celebrity switching on Dean's Christmas lights. I believe that the illuminated reindeer, etc., were bought by Bill Dean from Bolsover Castle. The blue hat in the middle bottom is me. The Falcon Hotel had a parrot. As you can imagine, this parrot was very fluent in colourful language. I remember one Christmas when I was in the church choir, we went with the vicar into the Falcon to sing carols. I had heard that there was a parrot and looked forward to seeing it, as I'd never seen a parrot. I was very disappointed that it had been moved to another room for the protection of the vicar's ears. And that's where the Falcon was located. Dean's shop, with Harry Singleton's bungalow, with his farming implements on the roof. In the 1980s, I was helping Harry to turn a plough around the opposite way. The plough was on top of a 6 feet high wall in the backyard. Harry brought me a very old ladder that was only 6 feet long, previously inhabited by numerous woodworms. I climbed up 3 rungs and worked the plough around until it was at right angles to the wall. At this point, the ladder disintegrated, and I ended up inside the bits of ladder, standing on the floor with my arms stretched up, supporting the weight of the plough. Harry stood back watching and said, "Don't drop it, we'll never get it back up." After what seemed an age, he came with some old step ladders, and although exhausted, I did manage to complete the job. Harry said, "I was worried about that plough then." I said, "I was more worried about being under it when it dropped." Stanley met him. Stanley from Frinston's Hill. Stanley could be seen walking for miles or directing traffic or shouting at Mr. Jones in the chemist, sometimes reliving his military experience, a well-known local character. That's a photo that Jill took with her phone just to show the modern layout. And that's after the bus shelter was demolished, but the base was still there, so it gives you a clearer picture of the old road layout. That's Church Lane merging with Lawton Road, and traffic on Lawton Road had the right of way, although some drivers thought differently. Pinfold Cottage in Falcon Square. The pinfold was where stray animals were enclosed until the owner came to collect them for a small fee. The anvil that now adorns the front garden was previously used by William Fisher Hawke in his blacksmith's business across the road. There was another pinfold behind where Heron's shop is today. At one time, Reg Walker lived here, and he was a saddler, and he had a saddlery shop down the side. That's another photo of the building while the part was still working and the other one was being built. And that was taken by PC Richard Cannings. That's the old cross in Falcon Square. missing its top. It is recorded as being placed in the bell tower of an earlier church, but since it has been lost. That's the old cross seen here in the garden of the bungalow at 22 New Road. The residents tried for years to get the cross moved from their garden so they could use the space for parking. This is the highest point in Dinnington, which might feature in why it was put there. It was probably originally sited near the green and would be a religious feature before there was a church. That's a modern shot of the square. Church Lane, 1890s. At this time it was called Common Lane, then Church Street, and now Church Lane. Common Lane led directly to Lawton over the common, basically just a track between the fields. Unfortunately for some, it was a direct route to the gallows, and more about that later. These two cottages, after some conversion, were later merged to form the lodging house. Named as Falcon View, they were built in 1909. On the wall is a picture of a lady playing the piano and is an advert for Hastings Furnishings in Rotherham. Before they were built, there was a prison cell next to the church. The lodging house looking rather drab. In the 1954 register of electors, there were 21 residents listed at the lodging house. The site of the cottage after the lodging house is now the entrance to Littlefield Road that passes Aldi to Constable Lane roundabout. Behind the manor house was a small piece of land known as the Littlefield, hence we now have Littlefield Road. When the lodging house was to be sold, the church was intending to buy it and build a church hall, but there were too many complications and costs, so now it is private residential. This group outside the cottage, which is now Littlefield Road, about 1915. Left to right, unknown, then Mr. Robinson, Mrs. Robinson, Jack Marriott, Alf Turner, Tony Turner, unknown, Wilf Turner, Mrs. Minnie Turner and Granny Turner. Young Elizabeth Twyble with her dad Jim in their farmyard on Church Lane, also now part of Littlefield Road. They later moved to Old Hall Farm. Today this building is the first on Church Lane immediately below Littlefield Road, and it is residential. This was my Uncle Billy Baker's first cobbler's business, which he bought from his employer. In this photo he is 21 years old, which dates it as 1931. If you look how dirty the sign is above the open sash window, you'll have an idea as to how much dust they were breathing every day. Uncle Billy died aged 50. The other two men are Billy Musgrave and on the right Richard Bowes, who everybody referred to as Dickie Bowes. The building was later an undertaker's chapel of rest. Hodkins Builder's Yard. When this was a farm, the shop that became Uncle Billy's Cobblers was a butcher's shop. This is the photo of Hodkins' sign that is now located in Portland, Oregon, USA, and hangs on a wall in Pride of Place. This row of terraced houses is Park Terrace and was built in 1905. My dad was born at the far end in 1924. This photo shows the shop that sold fancy goods and today is the old village club. There's the plaque on the wall of the first house below the club. The rectory, now the Employment Exchange. This was originally built at a cost of £5,000. The walls are 20 inches thick. Wade Kay did the solid oak woodwork. This lad is bringing water from Townwell Yard. A few wells in the village were private. Everyone else had to carry water from here. This is the same well that we as kids fished for sticklebacks and tadpoles. Also in the pond that was behind there were newts. The spring that ran through the well, then Ward's cottage garden, housed the best watercress that you could find anywhere. That's a new house with the well in the back garden, and this pump actually does work. This is a black and white photo that I coloured. I bought it for 99p on eBay. After I bought it, I found out that my granddad lived in the right-hand cottage, my grandma was brought up in the left-hand cottage, and my great-granddad died in the right-hand cottage. 99 well spent, I think. And the gas lamp was fuelled by gas from the coke ovens. This is Church Street in 1890s. And again at a later date. Out of sight on the right was Limeland's cottage, still there today, over 300 years old. Manor Farm on Lawton Road seen from Common Lane. In our time we would have seen the manor house and the back of Foster's bus garage. Twible's cows coming in for milking. Church Lane was the best ski slope after the cows had come up. Another one that I coloured. We were all used to it, but how much dust did we actually breathe? That's the bottom of Church Lane Hill, but all this now has gone. These are the fishing ponds, and there is the boathouse, or was. And the fishing ponds, apart from having boats for pleasure, also provided ice for the ice house, seen at the bottom of the map. More on that later. Nothing to walk on but mud. And this is how it was for decades. Is this the first known case of fly tipping? This first extension to the church was built by James Hodkin in 1906, and the stone was quarried from a quarry near to where the butterfly house is now. It was accessed down Walnut Drive. Wade Kay made the new solid oak door and frame for the church. The gentleman in the trap is believed to be Mr. Frank Fisher, who was a very frequent visitor to the Falcon Inn. While he was in there, he always enjoyed himself immensely and relieved the Falcon of a fair amount of alcohol. When it was his time to leave, he would be incapable of finding his way home, or indeed climbing into his trap. He was a popular visitor, and his friends would load him into his trap, point the horse in the direction of Brand's farm, and it would take him home every time. But we don't know what happened when he got there. I imagine the horse would be in the shafts all night and he'd sleep it off in the trap. I can remember these dustbin lorries. I had a green dinky toy one. The council kept them down the track at the side of Pimfold Cottage. This was when the bin men collected your metal bin from your yard, carried it to the lorry, emptied it, and then took it back afterwards. But what happened before the motorised bin lorry? Household waste was collected by horse and cart and delivered to the sewage works down Church Lane, where it was incinerated in a coal-fired incinerator called the Destructor, resulting in what was called clinker. This was taken away to be used to repair footpaths and byroads. Walnut Drive was made with this, and we referred to that as the cinder track. So what happened before the incinerator came? The village was quite small. Everyone dug a hole in the ground, and this was called an ash pit. Ashes from the fire were placed in the pit. Most other waste was composted. There was no packaging that couldn't be composted. There was a horse and cart with two men. One was the filler and one was the carrier. They went round the ash pits, and the filler filled a sack, the carrier carried it to the cart and emptied it. When the cart was full, it was taken to the ash yard on Church Lane. Here it was sorted into coarse or fine ash. The coarse ash was sold to be used in brick making, and the fine was used in fertiliser. There would be just a few bones of broken crockery to sift out, usually. What about toilets? The privy, the midden, or the closet? There's a posh one. A wooden toilet compartment was made with a board with a hole in it and a bucket underneath. During the night, a horse and cart came round and took the bucket through a flap at the back and emptied it into a special cart. They have a similar system in Russia today. They are called Putins. The cart was nicknamed the honey cart. The contents of the cart were then taken and emptied into a brick-lined cesspit that was designed to slowly leak into the surrounding ground. There was a story that one of the night soil operatives allowed his coat to fall into the full cart. As he attempted to fish it out, his mate said, "Don't be daft, it's no more use to thee." He said, "I know that, but my snap's in it." When the cesspit became full, a man who was referred to as the gong farmer would empty the pit into the cart using his bare hands, a shovel, a bucket and a ladder. And this was then used as fertiliser. But also, it had another use. Can you believe it was used as pig food? It was therefore customary for wealthy people to eat mutton and poor people to eat pork. Compared to other jobs, the gong farmer was very well paid. Many people thought that their backyard wasn't complete without a pigsty. When my dad lived at the lodge to the hall, they had such a toilet. And one day, Dad and Uncle Chris saw my Auntie Nellie going into the closet. They grabbed a rose spray from the garden and filled it with cold water. Quietly opened the flap to reveal a full moon protruding through the hole in the board. They gave it a good shot of cold water. Auntie Nellie, with knickers round her ankles, came running out and screaming, "There's a rat in there and it's clung on." Everybody had a gazunder, a chamber pot, under the bed for use in the night. But what happened before there was a cart to empty the buckets? Another posh toilet. A hole was dug and a wooden compartment built over it. A board with a hole was placed at suitable height over it, and from time to time straw, sawdust and various other suitable materials were added to aid the composting process. In warmer weather, bunches of lavender were hung to add some delicacy to the aroma. When it was deemed to be ready, the hole was filled in and another hole dug, and the toilet compartment was simply lifted over it. The best rhubarb was that grown where the hole had been filled in during the previous year. A van outside the bank. At this time it was the National Provincial Bank. Eventually, Westminster Bank, National Provincial Bank and District Bank merged to become National Westminster Bank, NatWest. Ladies probably returning from the tennis courts at the Colliery Institute, or they could be going to play at Dinnington Hall. They could be going to Limeland's cottage down Church Lane, as there was a tennis court there. William Fisher Hawke, Billy, outside his blacksmith's shop next to Hall Farm. I used to be late home from school because I'd be watching Billy shoeing horses. Repairs for Billy. Billy was once asked if he used pi when calculating the length of steel for a cartwheel tyre. Billy replied, "I know naught about pie except when I eat apple pie, but I always get it right." It came to light later that Billy ran a measuring wheel around the rim of the cartwheel. There's Billy with his two children in the blacksmith's yard. The building on the right is the one that you see from the road opposite the church. The window in the middle is Twyville's kitchen window at Hall Farm. This yard is now being built on as Blacksmith's Court. And there's a derelict smithy and another one. This house is on the same site. It's knocked down now, but it was once occupied by Snow's coal merchants. It then belonged to the fairground people. It's now been demolished for approximately 11 new houses and bungalows to be built there. That's the empty land before they started, and the new complex was to be called Church View, but I think they've changed it to Blacksmith's Court, a fitting tribute to Billy Hawke. A farm building at Hall Farm during conversion showing the large oak beams. These huge beams came from a ship that was being dismantled at the port of Bawtry on the River Idle over 400 years ago. Below Billy Hawke's place was a stone cottage, just visible on the right. This was demolished, and below that was Mr. Brewer's house, today Nathan Guy Hair Salon. Mrs. Brewer is in the porch. Mr. Brewer at his front door on Lawton Road. All this area below Hall Farm was a farm croft that had been bought from Squire Aythorpe by a farmer, William Presley from Anston, in the 1700s. He eventually sold it in small plots, and cottages were built on those plots. These cottages then required access, so a lane was built to serve the cottages. And as it had been part of the croft where the barley was stored, it was named Barleycroft Lane. And numerous musket balls have been found in those gardens. What time is it? We will have a break. That's the NatWest Bank, the National Provincial Bank at the time, on the right, 1906. Wade Kay's builder's yard is on the left, and that's now Medlock Court. And Wade Kay was also an undertaker and a joiner. But Wade Kay built the row of terrace houses as you enter Lawton after St John's Church, and that's why it's called Wade's Row. And beyond Wade's yard was Manor Farm. Converting houses into shops in order to serve the needs of the increasing number of miners, 1905 to 6. The man on the cart is John Bulmer from Church Lane, who traded as a carrier. In 1892, there were only 3 shops in Dinnington: a butcher, a tailor, and a general provision store. On Saturdays, the pie clip man would bring his wares to sell from a small cart. Pie clips were like thin crumpets. The first shop to be built in Lawton Road was Fred Barlow's butcher's shop, next to the bank. Fred used part of his premises as a cycle shop, and a few years later he sold the butchery business to move his cycle business to where we remember Barlow's, that is now Reed's Rains. Fred was an ardent cyclist, and he had been known to ride all the way from Brookhouse up the steep hill and on to Lawton with a sheep across his shoulders. His son Harold sold the business in 1945 to Les Barrett, who kept the trading name of Barlow's. My dad worked for Les. Dress of the day, 1905 to 10. The stone walls were part of the original farm that was still there for some years after Barleycroft Lane was created. Different dress, 1910 to 20. looking up Lawton Road with Manor Farm on the right. Barleycroft Lane, and now you know why. The first houses on Barleycroft Lane after the bank. Although most people didn't need a bank in the early 1900s, as the average farm labourer would earn in South Yorkshire 16 shillings a week. That's 80 pence a week in today's money. In Suffolk, it was only 10 and sixpence. That's 52 and a half pence a week for 12-hour days. The small building with the pointed roof on the left was the first Methodist chapel in Dinnington. This photo is more modern, but it is shown on OS maps in 1854. The pile of rubble is outside what later became a place where petrol was sold from a hand pump. It later became my Uncle Billy Baker's cobbler's shop when he moved from Church Lane. The underground petrol tank had to be filled with sand and water to extract the fumes. When I was a young lad, I delivered shoe repairs for Uncle Billy on a bike with a basket on the front and a pedal bike brake that could load you into the basket if on a hill you pedalled backwards and forgot about the brake. When Uncle Billy took shoes in for repair, he would label them with a small tag. He would write the customer's name and address, and for the repair he would put L heels for leather heels, and for steel tips, S tips, and so on. One day I had to deliver 2 pairs of repaired shoes to a very posh lady who would put Hyacinth Bouquet to shame. I think she would have looked down on the Queen. For convenience, I will call her Mrs. Fauntleroy Smythe. I rang her posh doorbell, and she answered it herself and looked down on me and barked, "Yes." I handed her the shoes in the paper bag with the label attached. I thought she was going to choke. She blustered, "Tell Mr. Baker that one is not amused and that one shall be speaking to him very shortly." Now, if the lady had requested crepe soles, the tag would have said, "Fauntleroy Smythe, see soles." Unfortunately, she had requested rubber soles. It was thought that Barleycroft Lane would be the main street before the mine was thought of, and so the first shops emerged on there. They're the cottages on the left as you look towards Lawton Road. The first purpose-built school in Dinnington was built in Barleycroft Lane in 1874, and it cost £600. The fee to go to the school was a penny a week. I went there to the Cubs, but it was a bit later than 1874. Connie Clarkson was our caler. There was a school in Dinnington before this, but it was just a room in a lady's house on Church Lane. That's a view from Lidget Lane with Middleton Hall on the right, named after Middleton Aythorpe. It was used as an overspill classroom for the inadequate school. The girls and infants stayed in the school, and Mr. Pickard and the boys used this hall. This is Connie Clarkson. She was a very special lady indeed. Converting the old school building to create the Ukraine Club. Also, it was the pride of Dinnington RAOB Club, the Royal Antediluvian Order of Buffaloes. The Barleycorn Club was previously called the Jubilee. It was a very popular venue. The building next to the Barleycorn Club was originally a dance hall and then a billiard hall with several tables. And it was a very popular venue for the younger generation. That was Tierney's Solicitors. The street sign on the end wall on the left proclaims Leopold Street. This refers to what today is Leopold Avenue. This was the only part of Leopold that existed at this time. Eventually a road was created linking Lawton Road with Lidgett Lane, previously called Letwell Road, and this became Leopold Street, and then this one was changed to Leopold Avenue. The sign on the shop on the right appears to be A Cleary. Bit too dark on there to read. Kids on Leopold Street happily playing without expensive toys and not a battery in sight. Lawton Road with Manor Farm on the right, where my ancestors, the Gurnall family, farmed. Ivan Jepson's grandfather managed the farm. There's a longer view. These photos are probably 1910 to 20. (1950s) Lawton Road with the telephone box next to the toilets at the entrance to Wigmore's bus garage. You can see at this time that the market was end on to the road. In the early days of the market, it was illuminated by paraffin flares. One that are coloured. Far right is the entrance to Leopold Street. This photo has to be before 1919, as Pennington's chemist seen there ceased trading shortly after the war. Thrift stores with their delivery van. There were boxes of biscuits out on the pavement. How long would they be there today? Fred Horn, barber. Fred moved around a bit and can be found in different locations at different times. He was barber for many years. Fred regularly visited the hall to shave the squire. After the squire's death in 1922, his wife wrote Fred a letter thanking him for his loyalty. Christine and Pauline, meet your granddad on the big screen. Bruff staff, seems a lot of staff for one shop. They weighed sugar into blue paper bags, patted butter from a barrel and stamped it with their logo. Butter, 1 and 4p a pound, that's 7p today. That's a morph showing the location of it. (1960s) view down Lawton Road. A shop sign proclaiming children's outfitter on the left. Foster's buses and fuel pumps. Notice near the phone box there's a pram and nobody with it. Not uncommon in those days, probably nipped into the toilet and parked the baby. Here you can see St Leonard's Church, St Leonard's House and Falcon Hotel in one photo, taken from Foster's yard. Harry Turner, keeping everything spick and span as he always did. A very well respected man and butcher. Harry traded from 41 Lawton Road on the corner of Leopold Street, and you didn't want to miss his tomato sausage. Harry's motto was quality, cleanliness and civility. Two of Dinnington's favourite pianists, 1934, Lance Lidgett and Jim Marshall at the Meadow Dairy, 43 Lawton Road, now the Salvation Army shop. St Leonard's House next to the church. Dr. Wilburn lived here during the war. He used it as his surgery and lived at the Manor House. The Manor House, now demolished, currently the site of Aldi. Cliff Hodkin lived here in 1954. 1966 view down Lawton Road, and the sports car probably belonged to either Dr. Michael Rawlins or Dr. J.B. Maxfield. Back in time again, some of the local lads. Almost everyone in this photo is wearing a cap. Outside of Marsden's, where Billy White came later. Another popular character was Harry Earley, who had a clothing shop. He was well known for his comical adverts, such as, "Harry Earley's trousers are down again." A large family paying a visit to number 63 Lawton Road, 1905. Today this is next to the Nottingham Building Society. Notice the front gardens, and the distant shop with the blind out was the Co-op. And that just shows whereabouts that was. Foster's Pumps again. And the market reminds me of the stall that we called the Pot Man. He used to juggle with plates, but we never saw him drop any. Even so, he was a smashing bloke. Foster's ticket office at the back. This is where Aroma Coffee Shop is now. Pod 100, famous along those who travel on it to their way to school via the train from Kiveton Park, chanting in harmony, "Roll along, Foster's buses, roll along. There's a hole in the tyre and the blessed thing's on fire. Roll along, Foster's buses, roll along." Entrance to the gents' toilets. If you had to use them, how long could you hold your breath when you went in? Leo's, forerunner to Aldi. The arrival of Aldi, February 2016. There it is being built. An aerial view of the bus garages in the Comrades Club. Wigmore's garage in the middle was actually built as an indoor market, and until Wigmore's moved in, that's what it was operated as. There were also numerous social events held there and boxing matches. Today it is the snooker club. The Comrades Club was a tin hut in the early days. There's Wigmore's garage and the Comrades Club. Who remembers Spoilt for Choice and Basics? Going back a minute. If you're in this area this week and you have young grandkids, after your coffee in Aroma, go to Aldi and buy the Humpty Dumpty toy. It's fantastic. It comes with Aldi King's horses and Aldi King's men. Wigmore's bus in front of Bruff's. This particular bus was later sold by Wigmore's to another bus company. A couple of years ago it came up for sale on eBay. It had been converted to a racing car transporter with living quarters. There it was. The next three photos show the sorry state that it was in when it was for sale. They want about 3 tubes of teacup for that. It sold for £7,000. There's my dad taking a bus into the garage. The toilet block made it very difficult to manoeuvre the buses in and out, especially when there were cars parked on the road. The Dinnington Main and Middleton Brass Band, founded in 1904, started out with second-hand instruments. The band quickly gained a reputation after winning contests in Crystal Palace in 1906, 1910 and 1913. The band then became the Dinnington Main and Middleton Prize Band. Initially they practised in a round marquee at the hall grounds. There were no chairs and they had to stand for the whole session. Later the band received support from Dinnington College Institute with a monetary grant and the use of a room with chairs. The band built their own room in 1952. As the Salvation Army Band on a memorial march in September the 1st, 1912, outside what became Pound Stretcher. The shops seen here would be 6 years old since conversion from private houses. This amount of snow was the norm when I was at school. Seen here outside Billy White's store, where you could buy your school uniform or have goods laid away. Billy had a fantastic selection of toys. When my dad was at school, he was walking to school one day with my Uncle Chris. They reached Billy White's shop, and in the window was an electric train. They'd never seen or heard of such a thing before. All it did was go round in a small circle. They were so mesmerised at this that they watched it all day until it was time to go home from school. Marsden's Bon Marché shop, the predecessor to Billy White's. One of my most difficult colourings, Marsden's. These shops were just below the bank, and Stamp was also chauffeur to the Aythorpes. This photo is 1905 to 6. The Co-op building is there and was built in 1905. The houses were being converted into shops in 1905, and these houses have not yet been converted. The building with the gable opposite the tree became Pound Stretcher, as we remember it. And on the left were orchards and a small stream running all down the road. A little later, as a couple more shops have appeared, the shop with the gable became Pound Stretcher. The farthest in the row is Dundas House, 85 Lawton Road, and is now Home Care 2. The furthest building in the photo is the Woodhouse Co-op, built in 1904, now on the corner of New Street. The photographer misnamed this as New Street. It's actually Lawton Road. The building with the props became Pound Stretcher in our time. The further building with one prop is now Cedar Properties at 87 Lawton Road. The Palace opened in 1913 by James England. The first ever theatre in Dinnington was a marquee set up where the market now stands and would feature travelling performers. That was Proctor's Travelling Cinema. My dad remembered his experience of the Palace as the Saturday visit that he called the Twopenny Rush. Some mothers would take items to Brown's pawn shop across the road to get money to take their children to the cinema. I would go there to watch cowboy films, Roy Rogers, then gallop home slapping my thigh to make galloping noises. We didn't need expensive toys. The room above the cinema was used by one of the first ever clubs in Dinnington, and that was a Masons Club. These are two photos that I've coloured. At one time, the cinema was used as a Sunday school by the Salvation Army. Still seen here with steps. This was after Wood Supermarket closed down. the cafe at the side of the cinema that we called 16-ton Cafe. This nickname came about when the song 16 Tons, sung by Tennessee Ernie Ford, was continuously playing on the jukebox as it was so popular, 1955. There's a cafe, 16-ton Cafe, 1950s. The large advertising board on the wall of the Walk Along Shoe Company shop that was a franchise of the Moccasin Company of America. Entrance to the Lyric between the windows, and then there is Hardy's Kimberley Brewery building. 1914, recruiting men for the First World War. The cafe was used as the recruiting office. Recruiting men for the First World War at the bottom of Lawton Road. The chapel was used as the recruiting office. Going to war. Sadly, 109 of them never returned. The bus was one of the first Foster's buses. Wood Supermarket, still with the steps. How many of you went home and then remembered that you left the baby in the pram outside the shop? Yes, it happened. Now divided into two, this is also out of date, as Happit is now a charity shop. The newsagents on the left was Sutton's. That's a then and now of the cinema. Between the cafe and the Lyric is Constable Lane, just at the side here. Which policeman was this named after? Actually, it has nothing to do with the constabulary at all. The name stems from its original Latin version of Numeratio via stabile, roughly translates to Count Stable Lane. This was a place where animals had to be brought and be counted so that they could be taxed. And that's an example of the tithes that were put on different animals. That would be 1836. A tithe basically meant a tenth of the value or profit, milk yield or wool yield, etc. The lane now connects to Undergate Road at the new roundabout. Undergate Road was named, and I always thought it was something to do with a pit, but it was named because it passes through land that was previously called Undergate Meadows in the enclosure map of 1778. Of course, in those days it was all level until the pit came. Two others that I'm always asked about is Pennypiece Lane in Northampton and Pocket Handkerchief Lane off Todwick Road. Pennypiece Lane is at the side of Bottled Wellwong. There's Bottled Wellwong. Bottled Wellwong is in the Great West Field, once owned by the Duke of Leeds. It roughly translates to the land at the marshy bottom near the stream. During the Enclosure Act of 1773, this land was divided into numbered strips and rented at a penny per piece. So Pennypiece Lane. Pocket Handkerchief Lane off Todwick Road. Sounds like it should have a romantic tale, but sadly not. A pocket of land was not very useful to the farmer, and a pocket handkerchief was of no use for farming at all. It refers to a small triangle on the bend, now merged with surrounding land. Also, in 1900, Breck Lane was on the OS maps as Brick Lane. Don't know if you know this building. The Lyric began its life in 1910 as a roller skating rink and later a music hall. Before the Palace Cinema was built in 1913, the Lyric showed silent films, mostly westerns. The projector being accessed by a ladder. It has been a source of enjoyment for many, with dancing, pantomimes and concerts featuring many popular artists. The Beatles were too expensive at £100. The Lyric now has talks that go on for hours. Melia's grocery shop was on the left of the entrance and Fred Rastall had his gents shop on the right. The first travelling theatre group to play at the Lyric, 1910-12, the play was Daredevil Dorothy. The Salvation Army met in the Lyric and their last meeting here was June the 6th, 1920, prior to their new hall opening on Clarence Street. There is an entry in the Salvation Army diary that their hall was moved in 1911 to the bottom of Plantation Avenue from where it had been among the huts in Tin Town. Makes me think that this was when Tin Town was demolished. More on this later. Hawkins Barbers, where you could have any style of haircut that you chose, but everyone came out with the same one. The market shop belonging to Beth Canning's mum, Mrs. Hilda Oxley, seen here in the doorway. Lucy Bailey at Bailey's Nursery Gardens behind where Heron is now. They had this traction engine to make steam to sterilise the greenhouses. There's Lucy superimposed at the site of her fruit shop, family fruit shop, 37 Lawton Road, and the far left was Harry Turner's Butchers at 41. And I don't know if you remember the corner, it was Watts's estate agent. Graham's shop, where they charged accumulators for radios, sold gas mantles, weighed nails to sell by the pound, and stocked almost anything that you might need. Mr. and Mrs. Handy. People queued down the road for their bread and pastries. And you remember the little brown Ovis penny loaves? Ivan Jepson outside his travel agency. Ivan was very popular, and also at the Lyric he founded the Theatre Club in 1962. Basil Willoughby, pork butcher, Dundas House, 85 Lawton Road. Basil Willoughby, the tall man on the left, was also a JP. His small son standing in front of him was Eric, and he became my mother's butcher along with Harry Turner. This photo must have been taken near Christmas as there are turkeys hanging. The door that can just be seen on the left of the butchers was the door to their residential area, now the door to home care too. The sign in the window declares fed by His Majesty the King. Unfortunately the rest is mostly illegible. This window is 4 feet below the ground. It would have been in the front garden to allow light into the cellar, where there was a large fireplace with a spit for roasting meat. The window is now under the pavement. Masborough Equitable Pioneers Society, we called it the co-op. There was a butchery department, a drapery and a general provisions department. You can see that the sign is damaged. This is because it was plastered over during the Second World War and was damaged when being uncovered. Signposts and railway station names were taken down during the war, and there was a real logic behind this. In the 1940s, there was no motorway network, and the A roads were much narrower. There were no sat-nav, just paper maps. So it was much harder to navigate around the country. When you're navigating using a map, the first thing you need to know to make any sense of it is to know where you are. So if you were a German paratrooper dropping in at night, the best way to locate yourself on a map was a signpost, so they were removed. South Street, houses for the miners. These were for the deputies and foremen. South Street again. The houses needed water to build them, and this was piped from the pit. To bring in the other solid materials, the railway line was extended all the way to Lawton Road at the side of where Coronation Avenue was to be built, opposite what later became East Street. From there they were delivered by horse and cart. More cars appearing. The first car in the village belonged to Dr. Cole of the Manor House. He kept it in a garage converted from a stable by Sid Hodkin. One of the very first cars to appear in Dinnington, it was owned by a farmer, Mr. Brabs of Top Farm. It was a 1906 Wolseley Standard Saloon, and it cost him around £900. There's one that I coloured. Long dresses and muddy streets were the order of the day. And that's just to show whereabouts it was. The streets might have been muddy, but nobody went out unless they were smartly dressed. And there's some smartly dressed local posers. The new Wesleyan Chapel opposite New Street, it later merged with the Primitive Methodist from the bottom of Lawton Road. The nursery school at the corner of Plantation Avenue. The young lad in the middle and the rocker, I believe, is me. We had to sleep on canvas camp beds in the afternoon, and I didn't like that. I wanted to play. There's another view. On rare occasions, when toast tastes a certain way, it takes me straight back to the nursery. I can't remember, but we must have had toast while we were there.
Yeah.
The bandstand with Lawton Road bottom shops. Very popular place to be when the early band was playing. The villas in the background. Can you see a ghostly figure in front of the bandstand? You probably can't. There is one, but I don't know who he is. This advert can still be seen on the wall of the walk-through passage at the side of Paolo's restaurant. It links back to when the shop was Sturdy's Provisions. And that's one of Sturdy's bags. And that's where the advert is inside there. There's one on the other wall, but it's barely anything left of it now. And that's today. Hardy's Kimberley Brewery, or Hardy and Hanson's Brewery. The oldest independent brewery in Nottinghamshire, dating back to 1832. They ceased brewing in 2006 when it was sold to Green King, who sold it for housing development. There was no brewing done here in Dinnington. This was a distribution depot for Hardy's Brewery at Kimberley, Nottingham, where they used water from a local spring. This shows its position just below the lyric. There they are delivering their wares at the Buttercross in Tickhill, and Starbright was their speciality beer. There's a compliment slip. This is one that I merged old with the new. The stables were at the rear, where 2 shire horses were kept, and accommodation for a beautiful dray. Mr. Chris Birch would drive these fine horses. In later times it became the offices of the gas company. Dean's Cafe was on the left, and now Glenn is on the right. Glenn is a fanatic about preserving trees, so much so that he won't even draw on paper, so he draws on people instead. That's the building in its original condition. And it would never have been there if not for this man, Thomas Hardy. The first bank and post office in Dinnington, Midland Bank. The horse and trap were the postal delivery vehicle. The building was built in 1909. Today it is called Bank House. A sign over the post office proclaiming public telephone, as there were no others. And there was never a queue because there weren't many places to ring. Another view, you can just see the villas in the background. Clatworthy's first shop. This would probably still be there today, but when they wanted to open an off licence, there were objections from the Methodist chapel across the road. And so they had to build an extension on New Street, Platty's, and that is still in use today. The front of the shop was rented out as a chemist. Jones Chemist at the corner of New Street. In 1938, Mr. Jones was the manager and continued as chemist until his retirement in 1969. This is Jill, working at Jones as chemist. I'm not sure if she was checking for cleanliness or if she's proposing a toast. The Gurnhill Trough. This trough originally stood in Falcon Square and is dedicated to my ancestor Samuel George Gurnhill, commissioned by his aunt Anne Gurnhill. Gurnhills farmed in Dinnington and came from Gainsborough. The trough was moved from Falcon Square into Doug Foster's garden on Barleycroft Lane, behind what is now Nathan Guy Hair Salon, to make space in the square for the bus shelter to be built. And I've just been informed tonight by Pauline that the bus shelter was built and there was a plaque inside it dedicating it to the King and Queen. I believe that Bob Pollard moved the trough. It now resides in Coronation Park opposite the Resource Centre. PC Richard Cannings with the clipboard posing for a publicity photo for the Yorkshire Post at the crossroads near the pit. The rider is possibly PC Lamming. The police station on Lawton Road, that is now a residential building. Would be very useful to have this today. The Colliery Institute survived this upper storey fire in 1914. There was also a later fire here in 1971 when it was gutted, requiring demolition. Colliery Institute Company was founded in 1908. Playing balls at the Stoop. The view from the Stoop grounds of Mount Dinnow, the largest slide around. Kids slid down on pit belting, car bonnets, dustbin lids, anything they could find. The very first popular cycle track built at a cost of £365 and 12 shillings. 3 photos from John Russell of the Resource Centre being built. Lawton Road bottom shops, probably more variety there than we have now in the whole town. We had much more as a village than we do as a town. Inside the Deli Diner at 75 Lawton Road, can you remember that? Who had a sausage sandwich? After 19 years, Jill Pickersgill sold the premises to Classic Interiors to extend their kitchen and bathroom property. The market shop and toilets. The market shop and market 1950s with the telephone box outside the toilet. There's a bus in Wigmore's garage. Looking up Lawton Road, 1920s, before the library was built. The library was built in 1936. The villas, 1908, indicating a muddy road, so no limestone covering yet. The villas were fortunate in having a 100-volt electric supply from the pit generator. One of the colliery managers who lived in the bottom villa became very ill, and crushed bark and straw was spread on the road to deaden the noise of the traffic to help him. Barlow's petrol sign out on the pavement on the left. The petrol filling pipe swung over the road, over the pavement to reach the cars. I bought my first moped from Les Barrett on the 90. The Co-op butchers and drapery can be seen here. The drapery, when we knew it, was run by Ralph and Ivy Vickers. The horse is probably returning from a visit to Billy Hawke to get new shoes. And along the centre of the road, but only just visible in parts in this photo, drains are being laid. The sewage works down Church Lane were created in 1908. Used by many of you probably, the walkway between the school and the police station. That phone box will promote memories for some and also hold a few secrets for some. The end of an era. I wasn't able to speak to the guys who demolished the school, but I wanted to know if they found any bones. My granddad told me that when the school was built in 1908, they buried a pig under the front entrance step. Grandma Batty at the War Memorial. Grandma Kate Batty was awarded a certificate for her untiring work in raising funds on behalf of the Royal British Legion. On the right is Ken Hallam. Here's Joe again. The cycle track behind the Colliery Institute, which was a very popular sports venue, including bowling greens, football and cricket, hockey and a tennis court. Aerial view of the cycle track, which was opened at a grand sports meeting on Saturday the 19th July 1913. And we'll take a break. So this photo shows the first location of Frisbee's shoe shop next to Arthur Cowley, gents outfitter, just below the bank. You can see the building that is the opposite way around, and if you look there today you can see that the bricks are slightly different to its surrounding where it's been blended in. Frisbee's when it moved down the street to where Nottingham Building Society is now. Then it moved across the road to where Paolo's is. We remember it there, 1950s and 60s. That's Sam Robinson. I haven't got a picture of Joyce, but there's Sam, very well liked couple. That's how we remember it. And on the left is Robinson's Sweet Shop with the ice cream fridge just inside the door. And this is where I started Cedar Properties in 2000. On my deeds for the building, it states that I'm not allowed to use the building as a lorry garage or a bus tour company, as it was Dolly Foster's Cafe, where you could get a ticket for £1 to go on a Sunday mystery tour. And the entry in the deeds was to protect Foster's bus business. And you couldn't get this scene today because on the right is a bicycle with nobody stealing it.
Can't leave them there now.
That's a 1980s aerial shot of the Co-op building with the vacant land behind, where Westgarth Terrace has been built and the new bungalows are not yet built on there. Robinson's shop became Dora Burgess's, Dora's candy shop. And next door was the provision parlour, which is now the home of Home Care 2. And there's John Burgess displaying his collection of cheeses for the provision parlour. That's a view of the villas, 1908. After the houses for the sinkers, these were the first houses to be built for the colliery. They were for the management. There's Herbert Hurst again at the side of the villas. Herbert maintained the roads and was also a carrier. Breck Lane before Ann Manor Road, before Thropham Estate was built. Woodhouse Co-op, newly built in 1904, before New Street was even built. Lawton Road, corner of New Street. This probably brings back memories of Kilner's dentist. Yes, oh. Mary, the receptionist, was lovely, but was still sat and quaked. Horse-drawn plough, snow plough on Lawton Road, opposite New Street. Not clear to see, but the horses are wearing nose bags, so they probably stopped for lunch. A good variety of shops all along the street. Today you have the choice of eating a pizza while having your hair cut. The old library built in 1936. The first librarian was Mr. Don Willoughby, son of the butcher, Basil Willoughby. And there's Mr. Pickard opening the new library. He'd fought so hard to create the library. Archibald Pickard believed that every child should have the opportunity to read. He realised his dream when the library opened and was able to offer a choice from 3,000 books. There's Alison in the pink, in front of my favourite section, practical things to make and do. Plantation Avenue and Coronation Avenue. How close was that slag heap? Very scary after Aberfan. To the kids growing up, it must have been an exciting place to explore though. Corner stores at Lawton Road bottom shops. Look at all those trees to the right and at the Resource Centre car park. And the bread shop that also sold 1 penny Ovis loaves and had bread in the window where you could often see the cat laid among the loaves. You probably can't read that, but would you like these prices? 50 pence for a haddock, £1.35 for sirloin steak. This is a lucky shot that I did on Christmas Eve. I'd only just asked Jill what the weather was and she said, I think it's reindeer. New Street, the barracks, simply named because the houses were laid out like army barracks. There's a map showing New Street was built first, hence the name, along with South Street, Howard Street, Clarence Street and Victoria Street and some of the villas. They were the first ones. That's, you can't read that, but that's the list of the barracks, and there are 142 dwellings in total in 1948. 1910. The barracks was built in 1906 according to some of the deeds. And that's a precious photo of the day, 1920s possibly. We're grateful to Bob Kemp for taking this photo. And there's a close-up. (1952) electricity newly installed in the barracks, and Ian Hollins is in the photo. The demise of Halifax Terrace. And it was just too exciting for this lad. The bandstand with Plantation Avenue being built behind it. The bandstand with South Street behind it. Unveiling the War Memorial, Sunday, November the 12th, 1922. The memorial and the plinth is made from Aberdeen granite. Barrel rolling at the Squirrel, 1960. And how close was that pit tip? And there's the winner receiving the trophy. Dinnington Relay Radio Building was built in 1939 at the start of the war as a gas contamination centre in case of gas attacks by the enemy. Fortunately, it was never needed. K&R car spares are there now. The old primitive Methodist chapel and school. The piece of land on the right was used as gardens, and later the police station and houses were built there. On the left of the chapel was a long wooden structure that was the labour exchange that we called the Dole Hut. This chapel was preceded by a wooden hut, which was the first meeting place, but this was soon abandoned for the superior accommodation of the chapel school, built in 1904. On the 19th of June 1966, it was certified for worship. Ironic that given the Wesleyan aversion to alcohol, years later it was demolished and replaced by a series of pubs. This photo was sent to me and I was asked if I could possibly improve it. The next photo is the result, and you can just see a horse and cart in the background. That's after a lot of work. Lord Nelson, that was one of them. Dragon. And Bambies. Who stole Bambies? Now replaced by apartments. Why are they called apartments when they're all joined together? Now when Bambies was demolished, there was a recess in the back wall that had been bricked up. When they pulled it down, there was a skeleton of a man inside. It had a chain round its neck with a medallion that was engraved with the words, Dinnington Hide and Seek Champion 1965. Okay, I lied. Dinnington Terrace, later called East Street. These were some of the first pit houses to be built for the sinkers after the barracks. The residents of Tin Town moved into these. The houses couldn't be built quick enough to cater for demand, and many houses were shared by two families. Explosive situation with men who were notorious for drinking and fighting. Tin Town, home of the pit sinkers. Initially there were 17 small wooden huts on concrete bases with corrugated iron roofs. As opposed to the rest of the village, the sinkers had electricity from the pit generator, but probably only useful for lighting. They had running water from a small number of standpipes with wooden troughs for washing. The pit had tapped this from an underground stream. This was able to provide 10,000 gallons an hour. For drinking water, though, they had to walk to the village well on Church Lane, half-a-mile trek across the fields, and they didn't have plastic containers to fetch it either. By 1904, when the Barnsley scene was reached, these 17 dwellings had become 100. All these occupied by sinkers and their families. There was a makeshift school that was nicknamed the Tin Bucket. It was just a small tin shed. The huts were arranged in streets and squares, but as they were temporary, there were no street names. Basically, there were no more than a group of garden huts in a sea of mud. Amongst them was the Salvation Army building. This was moved to the bottom of Plantation Avenue in 1911. There's a pit wheel being erected in 1902. And the pit is a big subject and deserves a talk of its own, so I'm not able to include much of it in this talk. There's the sinkers, sinking the shaft, extremely hazardous job. Many dangers including rockfalls and underground water. They were lucky to sink 40 feet a month through hard, solid rock. The Barnsley scene was reached after excavating 2,016 feet of stone in the summer of 1904. Sadly, some were killed from drowning and rockfalls. They're the sinking bricklayers. Notice he's got his radius board for the curve. The shaft was 19 feet in diameter. Recreation Terrace, the second group of houses built along with New Street and Oak Quarry Lane. East Street during demolition around 2001. East Street, the last two to go, 18 and 20. And I owned 20 to rent out. And I've still got a guarantee for that roof. Granville Street, that's sadly now gone. Dinnington and Lawton Station. The passenger service didn't start until May the 12th, 1912. Trips to Cleethorpes, Chester or Newcastle for some. A full gasometer. A byproduct of the coking plant, coal gas was extremely toxic but was piped to shops and houses and street lights. It was used to heat wash tubs to heat water for laundry washing. No safety light today though, you simply push the rubber pipe onto the gas tap and turn it on. No corgis. The gas was supplied via a coin slot meter. If you didn't have a shilling to put in, you didn't have gas. Dismantling the gasometer at Rotherham Road. A familiar landmark for many as children. This shows how the gas was sealed from leaking by a simple water seal. That's all that they had, some water. Gas lights and a gas mantle on the outlet. This was manufactured by coating a very fine net bag with metal nitrates that hardened, and a chemical change enhanced the light when it heated. There's the light. (1953), the lamplighter. Railway carriages near Lawton Common Lane. My maternal grandparents lived in one of these for a time until they got a house in Thurcroft. Doe Quarry Lane with a new layer of limestone covering the mud. The lane got its name from the quarry called Doe Quarry that was sited next to where the junior and infant school were later built. The schools were opened in 1907 infants and 1908 juniors, and the quarry was still there until it was filled in at the start of the First World War in 1914. I can't say where the material came to fill it in, but quite possibly could have come from pit waste. There were various other quarries that would have to be filled in as well. For example, at the top of Lawdon's Hill on the left, before reaching Doe Quarry Lane, there was a quarry there. The Glogger House, nicknamed after a previous resident. I think he was a prisoner of war and he stayed on afterwards. It was actually the driveway to the lodge, the driveway and the lodge to Thropeham Manor. And based on the orientation of the roof, this photo was taken from the driveway looking towards Doe Quarry Lane. Newly covered in limestone looking from the top end of Doe Quarry Lane. Still got the piles of limestone at the side. Newly built schools, 1908, and you can just see wagons on the pit tip, probably not on this screen. Later school, and modern. I bet those air raid shelters had a few tales to tell. There might be some here tonight keeping very quiet. At the outbreak of the war in September 1939, the boys section was requisitioned by the army to house the Dinnington company of the Yorks and Lancs Regiment. They were only there until November. On Wednesday the 10th of October 1928, the Chelmsford Mining and Technical Institute was officially opened. The institute had been erected at a cost of about £24,000, towards which the Miners' Welfare Committee made a magnificent grant of £17,500. It was named after the Right Honourable Viscount Chelmsford, who was chairman of the Miners' Welfare Committee. Wigmore's Excelsior Garage. I can remember changing to jet petrol for my motorbike because it was cheaper and Esso had gone up to 5 shillings a gallon. That's 25 pence for 4 3/4 litres. More than £7 today. The Lawdon's Hotel, sadly no longer with us. Built in 1926 after many protests from the chapels. It was a very popular local venue. When it was demolished, the bricks were taken to Furbeck Hall for reuse. And there they are. That's the sad interior during demolition. And the sad exterior during demolition. Houses on Doe Quarry Lane, 1910 to 20. Strange that a tree was cut down but the large stump was left in place. Slightly later now the hedges have grown. waiting for the limestone surface. Edgar Hooley invented tarmac in the 1902. The first road to be tarmacked was Radcliffe Road in Nottingham. But even in the 1930s, only 10 to 15% of British roads were paved, so we were way down the list. Miners' welfare. I remember paying a shilling, that's 5p today, to play tennis in the tennis court. Inside the building was a snooker table and a small refreshment window.
Bill Cash. Bill Cash, what?
Bill Cash.
All right, Bill.
Here it is in sad decline. Specialist equipment for designed to remove front teeth. Dows's funfair on the welfare, 1980. This happened in 1980 when a rocket at the display exploded in the full box of fireworks. Looks like Lordens Hill will be getting a limestone covering. First houses to be built on Lordens Hill in 1910. Before Lordens Hill it was called Loudon Hill, as shown on property deeds at the time. Loudons refers to a rich and fertile land, and the fields to the left were called the Loudon Fields. Hard to imagine that these people knew nothing of the future, and this was how they thought life would always be. It was a hard life, but somehow it seems very serene compared to today. But rainy weather must have played hell up with those Axminster carpets. No danger in walking in the road in these times. You wouldn't get flattened by an electric scooter. First parade on Lordens Hill, a Labour Day parade. That's before Leicester Road was built. Would be close to 1910. Lordens Hill with Revels builders' yards on the left. In the 18th century, Revels were prominent landowners. The shop and houses were built on this side before the houses were built further up the hill. Bagshaw's shop, previously a butcher's shop and later a sweet shop. Now houses are built on the right-hand side. Leicester Road prefabs, predecessors to the bungalows that are there now. Erected a prefab, so they must have come from IKEA. The new Salvation Army building was built on Leicester Road at a cost of £1,260 and 8 shillings. It opened on the 13th of June 1931. Clarence Street Bakery and Post Office will be handy today. Mr. Woolen came round the streets with a van, bringing gorgeous bread for sale along with other items. It reminds me of John Baker, who came round with his bus selling fruit and veg. He also had a barrel of vinegar, and you could take a bottle and have it filled with vinegar. My mum used to do that, and she would keep the bottle on the pantry floor. My dad would buy a bottle of dandelion and burdock every Friday from the pop lorry. He kept the bottle on the pantry floor. When my Uncle Chris came to visit, he would open the pantry door as he came in and take a long swig of pop straight from the bottle. One day, Mum had got her vinegar in a pop bottle. Uncle Chris came round and yes, you guessed it, but it cured him. Salvation Army site. The land was surveyed on Clarence Street, December 1919. The plot was 51 feet by 90 feet, where George Pollard's motorbike garage was later. Plans to build a hall for 350 people and a two-storey young people's hall with a capacity for 400. On the 7th of March 1921, at the opening of the new hall, over 1,000 people attended. The hall was a corrugated iron ex-army hut. Clarence Street, and on the right you can just see Wainwright's fuel pumps where Horace would come out and serve. Kenny's Butcher's Shop on Lawdence Hill, 1920 to 30, previously part of Revell's Yard. Gramway's, very popular shop. Red Nose Day at Gramway's. And after Gramway's came Quick Save, but sadly it was burned down. Victoria Street started at number 2. Victoria Street, not a car in sight. These days there's not a pavement in sight. Digging for victory during the war years, number 50 Victoria Street. Everyone was encouraged to grow food. Corner of Silverdale's and Lawdence Hill, 1910. A shop on the corner where Silverdale's club is today sold a huge range of hardware and bikes, and all these houses are now shops. And just look at the stock in this shop on Lawdence Hill. We're looking at a little piece of land behind Edward Street. This is Lidget Lane, New Street, Edward Street, doctors there, St Joseph's School there. We're looking at this little bit of land. This is showing Edward Street off Lidget Lane, but more importantly a piece of land behind. On Lidget Lane, the gap between the terraced houses is Edward Street, leading to Amen Field. This is a small piece of land that is still untouched today between St Joseph's School and the New Street doctors. Years ago, the house at the inner end of Edward Street had a large archway through the middle leading to the field. A horse and carriage could enter the field through it. It was used by entertainers and travelling troops, etc. The circus and fair came there. On one occasion, when a travelling theatre was performing here, they were presenting actress Maria Martin in the Red Barn. There were no toilets, and when the wrong backcloth was moved on the stage, Maria was revealed using a bucket. It was also the scene of riots when the threshing machine was placed on it. The local labourers went to smash it up in the Industrial Revolution, 1830. The original name of the field was Townend Field, but it gained its name of Amen Field because serious criminals were taken there to be tried. A special judge was brought in from Leeds or York. Crowds would gather from surrounding areas hoping for a guilty verdict. If the accused was found guilty, they were immediately marched down Church Lane, then called Common Lane, and hanged on the gallows at Lawton Common where the pub stands now. So this field became known as Amen Field. This next picture confused me for years until I found another copy with the information written on the back. The horse and cart are on Lidget Lane and the bicycles are at the junction of Barleycroft Lane. Here's a then and now. During the war, there was a concrete base that spanned the back gardens from 168 to 172 Swinstons Hill Road. Mr. Jones the chemist lived at 170. This base housed the searchlights for aircraft spotting. And one night, a Zeppelin came over Dinnington, clearly seen by the searchlights. But there were no anti-aircraft guns to shoot at it. A row of searchlights were placed along the ridge between Anston and Todwick. This was to confuse the enemy pilots into thinking they were flying over Sheffield and drop their bombs early. Not very good for the Anstonians, though. This is a view behind Swinstons Hill houses, looking across to where we now have the Lakeland estate. The stone building, as I remember it, had huge pink pigs living there, but during the war it had been used to house ammunition and explosives. On the left, what you can see there is petrol pumps on Swinstons Hill, just below the Catholic Church. 1 and 5 pence a gallon. This was owned by the Fulford family. Now, before you all can't walk again, I've got some interesting random information for those who are still awake. Is anybody awake? During the First World War, horses were taken for use of the army. This left farms short of animals to do the work. To help with this problem in a small way, circus animals were put to work on farms and in industry. Elephants, zebras and camels were some that were used. Elephants worked locally to here and ploughed the fields of Anston. And one member of our group was told by her grandma that there is an elephant buried in Anston, but she couldn't remember exactly where. So if you're a gardener, keep your eyes peeled. There could be more trunks than trees. Ploughing with an elephant. And that is Lizzie, the war elephant, in Sheffield. She moved steel ingots and heavy machinery and numerous heavy jobs. She worked for Thomas Ward and others. And there's a plaque to Lizzie, and that is in Sheffield at the Hancock and Lang building on Ladies Bridge. However, the elephant that is buried in Anston was not a war elephant. This one was from a travelling circus that was set up next to the railway line on Mill Lane. The elephant died and was buried in the field behind the piece of land that the garages used to stand on. This is the park on Nursery Road when I was 4 years old in 1950. At that time there were Twibell's cows in the park, and I got into serious trouble because I'd climbed through the barbed wire and tried to bring a calf home for a pet, and I could have been stomped by a cow. I hadn't even thought I would get it through the barbed wire. I was so upset by being shouted at that I ran away from home. I ran away to the fair, and I hid in a dodgem under the rain cover. I should explain that the fair was only 4 houses distance away, and I'd been observed by Mum all the time. The fair was where the cemetery is now. The cemetery didn't open until 1953. Opening the cemetery, 1953. The gentleman in the centre of this photo is John G. with the walking stick. John was unfortunate in being the first person to be buried in Park Avenue Cemetery. On Nursery Road in 1925, 21 trees were planted at the request of the Squire, who died in 1922. This was to celebrate the 21st birthday of his son, Toby Aythorpe. They alternated between lime tree and horse chestnut trees. These trees, therefore, have been there 100 years this year. Today some of them are missing. One of the horse chestnut trees stands out, and you might have noticed that it has a white painted line round the trunk. This line today has been repainted, but it was originally painted to make that tree more visible during the wartime blackout, when vehicles had to have very minimal lighting. That's the back garden of 91 Nursery Road before Park Avenue was extended into Anston. And that's a frozen jubbly from the little shop on Walnut Drive. Now if you're walking along Nursery Road from Anston to Dinnington, next to the park, if you know where to look, you will see an interesting piece of history. As you pass opposite Park Avenue and look up to the roundabout, you'll see that the road has a steady long climb. That wasn't always the case. The road used to be more level with a short steep hill from the hall gates up to the junction where the roundabout is now. At this time you could see an arched recess into the wall which was in front of the lodge. It had a trough in the bottom. Now it's only just visible if there were no leaves covering it. It looked similar to this. It was a drinking trough for the working horses, and it was called a moat. It's now almost out of sight. But it's amazing how much the road was lifted to ease out the gradient. Horses would have to go to Kiveton station to collect goods. They would have to pull the carts up Dog Kennel Hill, then up the steep hill on Ryton Road and back lane. By the time they reached this point, they had certainly had earned a drink. And the water flowed into and out of the trough from a spring or moat. It then went under the road and passed under the gardens of the house opposite, which is why the moat house was given its name. This spring then continued underground down to the backs of the houses on Swinsonsville Road, and there it surfaced in the fields called watergalls and formed a lake, now the site of Lakeland Drive. In winter, people would skate on the frozen lake until the early hours of the morning, with farmers shining their lights of the vehicles. This would be in the 1930s. Harry Dickinson, who lived at the Falcon Hotel, was taught to skate on there by Toby Aythorpe, the squire's son, in 1936. In those fields, we used to go to watch trotting races. I remember going to watch the harness racing, or trotting racing as we called it. This was in Jim Twible's field, which is now the first field on Lakeland Drive, immediately after Turnberry Way. Jim got into trouble with the racing board for allowing it to go on, and he had to go to London in front of the board. Fortunately, he was allowed to keep his trainer's licence. It was frowned on for racehorse trainers to be involved in harness racing, as it was deemed to be a gypsy sport. I don't remember anybody wearing safety helmets either, just flat caps. This is a diagram of the ice house. This was a brick-built chamber built into the side of the hill that is now a small wooded area between Limelands Estate and Devonshire Drive. It is a remaining part of the old alcove plantation. Ice houses were only used by the very rich and so were quite rare. The ice house had access at the top and a door at the side down some steps. It was used to store ice for use at Dinnington Hall throughout the year, as there was no refrigerators at the time. Ice was used to aid fevers, etc., and in the kitchen for food preservation. The way that it worked was very simple. During the winter months, the fishing ponds down Church Lane would freeze over. All the labourers would go and break up the ice and load it onto a horse-drawn cart. This was then taken with snow, if available, to the ice house and loaded through the top access. Straw was placed between the layers. Then water was heated over a fire and poured onto the ice. This caused it to form a solid mass, but the straw created layers. When ice was required at the hall, somebody would go to the ice house and use the side door as an access and chop out the required amount of ice with an axe or a saw. As the year progressed, he would need a ladder to get down to the ice inside. This is similar to our one, and it's built into the side of the hill, but there are steps down to the one that we've got. You can't see it anymore, it's still there, but it's buried over. This is the corner of a field between Thwaitewood and Thropeham, and it holds a secret. Some years ago, on this spot was discovered a hoard of mother of pearl. Obviously, this would not be here unless it had been transported in. This stems from Roman times and links to jewellery making. This would be where someone's dwelling stood and where he carried out his jewellery making trade. Now, you only have to suffer for 2 more minutes. Just to round off, there's one interesting little story that I'd like to tell. It relates to Twibell's farm and the Comrades Club. I had a friend called Dan who collected and renovated old tractors. Jim Twibell let him keep them in a building at the farm, and Dan was always fiddling with his tractors and polishing them. They looked better than new. Sadly, Dan became ill and eventually had to be permanently in a wheelchair. He became very depressed because he couldn't see to his tractors. I suggested that it might be better for him if he just sold them all. At least he'd know that somebody would be looking after them. A friend heard about this and told a contact who agreed to buy Dan's collection, and he bought the whole lot. Now Dan liked to go to the Comrades Club at the weekend, so I offered to wheel him there on Saturday nights. This was when you could smoke in pubs and clubs. And sometimes the air was so blue with smoke that you could hardly see the other side of the room. And you came out with your eyes stinging and your clothes smelling of smoke. I would wheel Dan to his favourite table and go to the bar and get the drinks. I noticed that after a while the air did seem clearer, and this was every time that we went. I thought about this for quite some time. And one day I was sitting in the garden having a coffee when it suddenly dawned on me why the air was clearing when we were in there. Dan was an ex-tractor fan. Oh, thank you all for coming. Sorry about that. No, I'm not. No, I'm not.